When it comes to retro GPUs and AGP cards, they are going for stupid money. But the thing is, I was able to buy a Matrox flagship, which is brand new in box, for just £10. Right, so we're going to have another crack at this. This time I've finally managed to get a hold of what should be a new in-box Matrox G750, which was their Millennium reboot. And this time, well, it's taken me a while to find the receipt because it was a while ago I bought this. In fact, it was April I bought this. And it turns out these are still going completely under the radar, which may make this one of the cheapest and best ways into old AGP gaming before anyone's clocked onto them. So step one, let's get this open and make sure this is actually our Matrox G750. I have done a whole video on these, and for people that don't realise, these Matrox Millennium G series cards, they're actually just full-fat Parhelia gaming cards that are cut down in half. So you end up with a Parhelia without paying the now extraordinarily high prices that the Parhelia sells for. Oh, there we go. That is huge. Well, here we go. A Matrox P750. Multiply your productivity. The most complete multi-display graphics solution. 256-bit GPU, 128-bit memory, AGP 8 times, triple RGB. That probably meant something different back in the day. But our last P750 didn't work, so I'm hoping this one does. It was checked by Guy. There is very little on here to do with gaming whatsoever, other than this down here. OpenGL 1.3 and Microsoft DirectX compliant surround gaming. I really enjoyed using it last time. It was a really good retro graphics card, but the problem is our one didn't work, so we had to test a slightly different version. Well, it's looking pretty new, other than the box being scuffed up. We got our foam, our driver disc, which we'll be using, which is 2003. Those are original drivers. We'll give them a go. We've got the accessory pack, which is still sealed. A VGA to television, which is interesting. And then we've got the DVI to dual VGA, which of course very Matrox. Then we've got the graphics card itself, which looks completely untouched. Look at that. It's an absolute unit of technology right there. The amount of circuitry on that, I really do hope it works. And then we've got the manual, the Professional Graphics Company. So we got the Parhelia P750, P650, the flagship, and then the two cut down versions of the exact same card. So you could either have the PCI version, the AGP version, or the PCIe version, of which I now own all of them, but we've not tested the PCI version yet. Keep out our drivers, and we'll keep out our graphics card. So drivers, and our P750. So step one, we are going to need a computer, and then we can plug in the P750. Now we just want to double check that it actually turns on. This is where it all went wrong last time. We didn't get a signal out of my previous unit, so it'd be nice if this one just worked completely out of the box. Well, we haven't got any signal out of it yet. Please don't tell me it's another one that's completely done for. Maybe reseating the card will do something. There we go, it just needed reseating. I was a little bit worried there, it was completely done for. Well, it's only taken us about a year, but we are finally going to be testing the P750 again. It has found the graphics card, VGA controller compatible, our Matrox disc. Basic connection setup, 2003. Oh, we need .NET Framework 1. Every combination under the sun, including a television. Analog monitor and a television, flat panel and a television, 3 analog monitors. Just go through, get these drivers on here, and then we'll give them a quick test to make sure they are doing some form of graphical acceleration. I'm hoping this comes with the menu that lets you enable all the enhancements, because the first thing we need to do is turn on the Parhelia's gaming enhancements, which is something that we noticed had a great effect on image quality, even at low resolutions, with a 2 frame per second performance hit. So you might as well just use them. Oh, we have a look at this intro graphic. Right, yes, you can install C++. Just do it out of the way. The Giga Color Viewer. Contact Matrox. Does this still work? It is just Parhelia LX on the display options, because it is just a cut down Parhelia. Yes, straight into it. 75 FPS on average. Maybe installing one of these? Power disk, isn't it? We need Matrox Power Disk to access the features of the graphics card, and that's the thing that I'm not seeing on here, is anything to do with Power Disk. if we run 3D Mark 2005, we can then try some of the latest drivers, and then we'll test performance on the release drivers against the latest drivers, and then if there's no performance difference, we'll just use the latest ones that actually give us PowerDesk. Now, I did go through and run 3D Mark 2001 just to get a baseline figure of how the graphics card performs completely out of the box with no enhancements or later drivers applied. And performance seemed bang on where I expected it to be. You got to remember, this isn't a full-fat Matrox Parhelia, this is a cut-down version that was never intended for gaming, that has got the gaming features left in it, just not in the drivers that seem to come with this box. I think they're on there somewhere, but I think due to a conflict of me not having .NET version 1 installed, it refuses to install them alongside the drivers, so I think you can somehow get PowerDesk on there with the drivers this card comes with. You just have to make sure you've got all the prerequisites installed first, which of course, on a machine like this, I just didn't. The thing is though, when actually comparing both the latest drivers from 2007 and the original launch drivers from 2003, there is no performance difference between them whatsoever. Now of course there are more recent drivers than this available, but they are primarily for CAD and specialist applications and remove a lot of the features that anyone that would be likely to buying a P750, that isn't of course using an ancient industrial computer and needs to replace it, would probably want. So we did go through and install the latest drivers, and that gave us back our Matrox PowerDesk, but when we actually ran them through 3D Mark again, I think there was around 3 or 4 points difference in favour of the original drivers over the latest ones, which really is margin of error territory. So there is virtually no performance difference between them. I did give a quick test in games, and there was no notable difference I could see. The frame rates were the exact same. So if you are using a P750, just hop on and download the latest drivers. The ones for Windows XP and Windows Vista are the exact same, so you should be absolutely fine to use those on your P750 graphics card. There's not really much point going through all the features of the Matrox drivers, because once again we've tested it on the Parhelia and we've tested it fully on the dedicated video I have on this line of graphics cards. But one feature that we did now have that was working, probably because we're using Windows XP and not Windows Vista, was the ability for the drivers to scan through your entire drive. You just give it a directory to go through and it goes through and looks for the games that it recognises, and then it applies its own enhancements and settings from there. So you get the advantage of essentially what modern drivers do, where you click optimize and it goes through, finds your games and chooses the best settings for them, but you get that on a graphics card from 2003. Now the actual list is not very extensive, and it takes a long time to search through all these, especially with some of the ways that games are set up. Think Morrowind's file structure, which is an abomination. It spent a good 15 minutes searching through that for the exe file. But eventually it had gone through and done it, and the games that it did recognise, things like Command & Conquer Generals, Half-Life, games like that, it applied its automatic settings for, with all the enhancements set up with the way the graphics card wants you to play them. Which is quite impressive, because once again, when you look at that box, this P750 has one line about gaming. None of it is about features like this. It is all about reliability in the workstation. And once again, I completely understand that that is what this is for. But for an AGP graphics card that we picked up new in box for £10, that's a good feature set to have. And it's worth mentioning that the drivers were very stable, there was no problems getting them installed, and the PC was bang up fine. There was no problems with using it. So finally we had a working P750 with the latest drivers installed and everything all set up and optimized ready. Now, I'm not going to do a full recap on the specifications of these graphics cards, because the best way of thinking of them is literally what I've said already. It is a full-fat Matrox Parhelia gaming graphics card, their big flagship card, just sliced in half exactly, and the P650 and P750 are the exact same for that reason. Now, the last version we tested was a P650 on the PCI Express bus, and this one of course is a P750 on the AGP bus. This one does only have 64 megabytes of DDR RAM running through a 128-bit memory bus, and the other one had, I think, 128 megabytes running through the same size memory bus. So we are dealing with half the amount of VRAM here. But the question is, When it comes to AGP graphics cards, trying to find ones that work and trying to find ones that are cheap is a monumental pain. We've all probably looked and seen the extortionate prices that are going for classic Radeons and classic Nvidia cards, so this is the question I want to ask today. It isn't about the out-and-out performance of this P750, it is about what experience it can give you for the £10 that you wanted to spend. If you want to hear more about the context and the history, go watch the dedicated video. That's not what this one's about. Now, all benchmarks done today are done with the full Matrox enhancements turned on, which is full screen anti-aliasing, which is meant to be 16 times FAA, along with full anisotropic filtering applied to all scenes. Long story short, every game is running the enhancements and the image quality is excellent. But what does this actually mean when it comes to performance in the benchmarks? Starting off the benchmarks, we have Half-Life 1, which is one of the games that's actually included with the Matrox optimization, so it goes through and sets up your settings for you. And it decided we should be playing the game with OpenGL and 1024x768 with full screen anti-aliasing, as well as full screen anisotropic filtering, which returned us 70 FPS on average with 1% lows down to 64 FPS. And already from the get-go you can probably tell what kind of PC you should be building for an experience that Matrox P750 is equipped to deal with, and really it is those late 90s and early 2000s titles where you can now experience them with decent resolutions, but some nice enhancements just to add an extra bit of level of quality to them. I spent a little bit of time running around just admiring how clean things looked on screen, and I'm hoping the capture quality really does reflect that. Next up was Morrowind, which of course the game was enhanced by default through the Matrox drivers, and the optimized settings it said we should be using were with a medium render distance with no shadows in the 640x480 resolution, with all of the enhancements mentioned before previously applied. Pretty much every benchmark in this has got the enhancements applied. We saw 38 FPS on average with 1% lows down to 31 FPS, which could stray slightly beneath this when you were in busy towns or cities, often hovering around 28 FPS. Inside areas and caves would often return you 40 to 60 FPS, but generally when you're outside in the wilderness you would be pretty much seeing 40 FPS or around that mark most of the time. Combat wouldn't change things too much and it was a pretty solid experience. In a similar vein to Half-Life, Unreal Gold defaulted to high settings in 1024x768 with all the enhancements and returned us 56 FPS on average and 1% lows down to 47 FPS. Now it is worth noting this is the only instance where I found the older drivers were a bit more stable than the newer drivers. And that isn't in all areas. Generally most of the time you're not going to notice anything happening whatsoever, but there was one spot where I like to do my big test of the waterfall coming down, which really does hammer in on a lot of these older graphics cards, and it still returned us with a lower frame rate, but that was the same across both sets of drivers. But what you can see is that little black square on the bridge, well, that wasn't present on the launch day drivers and is present in the latest drivers. But then again, that's also not something we saw when we tested the P650 and Windows Vista with this exact same set of drivers. So it could be the computer, it could be something else, who knows, old computers and old hardware is simply just weird. When you move things a good few years along to Unreal 2003, which wasn't exactly the peak of optimization back when it came out, we did have to run the game with primarily low and lower settings, but a few of the effect options turned on medium as they didn't really cause much in terms of frame rate difference. We saw 640x480 as our resolution, and an average of 38 FPS, which isn't exactly the most competitive thing in the world. Changing settings much lower than this could result in a slightly higher frame rate, but it wasn't actually much higher than I was expecting unless you went right down to the very lowest of settings. And given how nice this game can look in places, I opted to keep things with a mixture of low and medium just so there'd be some sort of eye candy to look at. So Unreal 2003 is playable, but you'd have to make the game look pretty bad if you wanted to be really quite competitive here. Halo Combat Evolved received a set of optimizations from the Matrox drivers and defaulted us with low and medium settings in 640x480, which I thought was a tad optimistic as I know some of the medium settings for particles and lighting and shadows can definitely cause a bit of problems in this game on weaker graphics cards. But here with the Matrox P750, we saw 36 FPS on average and 1% lows down to 26 FPS. Generally it was a bit like the Xbox original version of the game but slightly crisper in places, and it wasn't without
all of its problems, because there were some areas where you could get monumental frame drops if you were asking the game to render in a lot at once, like I often do towards the end of the benchmark segment. This would quickly resolve itself and the game was fully controllable, but those frame drops, well, they hit harder than I was expecting them to, and weren't present when you turned down some of the medium options that the game wanted you to run with. I have no idea what settings that Generals was actually running at here, because it was entirely custom and it wasn't quite low, it wasn't quite high, it wasn't quite medium, but trying to tweak the settings around the menu, I couldn't get it to replicate how the game looked with these settings. It was a mixture of, I'm assuming, some things on high and some things on very low, which they'd found was the best possible option, but either way, in 800 by 600 we saw around 28 FPS on average and 1% lows down to 23 FPS. This is of course including the fact that the game would cap itself down to 20 FPS during cutscenes, but for most of the actual gameplay you'd be bouncing between 25 and 30 FPS. So Generals, playable and better than I got to play it when I was growing up. Now, Half-Life 2 did struggle a bit more than I thought it would here, because I remember it running somewhat okay on the P650 that we tested it on, but maybe that's down to Windows Vista that we tested it on here, and maybe the XP drivers really aren't all that for these graphics cards, who knows? But either way, with low settings in DirectX 8, in the 640 by 480 resolution, we saw 37 FPS, which could drop down to the mid-20s when there was lots of action going on. Simpler scenes would see you running the game with anywhere from 80 to 100 FPS in certain places, but that wasn't for long until you were out of those smaller, more enclosed areas. I'd imagine it's our 64 megabytes of RAM here actually that's causing us this detrimental performance, but then again, we are also utilizing DirectX 8, and performance does improve dramatically when you drop things back to DirectX 7. So Half-Life 2 is really one you should tweak around with a bit more, but it is still playable with the settings you can choose just out of the box. But can it run Far Cry? Well, this has always been a bit of an Achilles heel for these Matrox cards, and not one that I've had a great deal of experience actually managing to fix. But we did manage to get the game open with low settings and using OpenGL rather than DirectX, and this was in the 800 by 600 resolution. There was some funky stuff going on with the textures and definitely the UV maps behind them, and that was all well and good until after a few moments of gameplay, it didn't matter what you were doing, the game would just crash. I tried a few workarounds to fix this, but unfortunately Far Cry still seems to be no dice on any of the Matrox cards I've tested. I did go through and install Counter-Strike 16, the weird sketchy version that was found online that lets you still play Counter-Strike online in 2025 on these old Windows XP computers. And with high settings in 640 by 480, this game was actually detected by the drivers and set itself to these settings, so it looked okay, I suppose. We saw 58 FPS on average, with 1% lows down to 38 FPS. It was very controllable and I didn't have any problems actually getting through and playing the game. And you know what? For actually a retro gaming experience, if you just want to play some Counter-Strike 16, there you go. I did want to give GTA Vice City a go, as I remember it being absolutely impeccable last time we tested it on a Matrox graphics card. And here, with medium settings in 640 by 480, right up until you were going through the most intensive parts of a cutscene, you were seeing pretty much a locked 30 FPS. Our average was 28 FPS overall, with 1% lows down to 22 FPS because of how intensive the cutscenes can be in this game, but throughout most of the gameplay it didn't matter what you were doing, you'd be seeing a pretty much locked 30 FPS. I just couldn't capture this on a capture card, because for some reason the output signal just wasn't detected, so enjoy a screen recording of just how good it looked on screen. Then finally, to sneak in a bit of a newer title, I did include Mount & Blade Warband, which ran with low and medium settings in 640 by 480. It wasn't a particularly great looking experience, but it did return a fully playable frame rate that would hover between 30 and 50 FPS depending on how many combatants were on screen. Your 1% lows were down to 27 FPS, and it would often hover around this figure when there was plenty going on, so in the midst of combat in larger battles, that's about what you'd be seeing. But for a game that has probably no optimizations from these drivers whatsoever, it actually performed okay, and at least it was a crisp image even if it was an ugly one. So overall performance from the Matrox P750, at least the AGP one we've managed to finally now test, well, it's not exactly astonishing performance, but for a £10 AGP graphics card, it gives you what is a nice experience where lots of those classic titles that run well will receive plenty of enhancements and no problems whatsoever. The issue comes more primarily from how much it begins to struggle in newer titles. Think anything around the Half-Life 2 era, where you're going to be struggling to seeing a good frame rate. Now, it's still a playable frame rate, but there are definitely better alternative cards out there unless you really value the image quality. I do think for £10 though, the fact is this is an excellent retro gaming card for certain titles, purely because you do get the Parhelia's enhancements without the price point. So, I mean, it's definitely a weird one. If you want to play your 90s titles and very early 2000s titles, excellent performance, excellent image quality, excellent settings, excellent drivers. If you want to play much newer games than that, well, really there are definitely better options out there. Now, I could do an entire section on the image quality of this card, but let's be honest, anyone watching this video is going to know Matrox, image quality, they more or less go simultaneously hand in hand. You are never going to have any problems with getting a good signal out of this card. When it comes to capturing retro equipment, usually it is a monumental pain to actually get the signal recognized and actually get the actual capture onto my PC. The only one that I could have struggled with was GTA Vice City, and you know what, I'm ill, I was feeling lazy and I didn't fancy dabbling with resolution timings just to be able to get the signal captured. But I didn't have to do any of that with the P750. You get a signal out of it, it's a quality one. Doesn't matter whether you're doing digital, you're doing analog, it will take the signal, it'll throw it to your display, and it'll work absolutely fine. I genuinely think for those people that just want a crisp output from their computer, well, once again, this is an AGP card where you're not going to have to worry about what kind of signal you want out of it. You want to run a television? Fine, it comes with the cables. You want to run a flat panel? Fine, it works perfectly with HDMI and modern signals. You want to run a CRT? You want to capture over VGA? It works perfectly there. These graphics cards are dead scalable. You can get a widescreen signal out of them, you can get whatever type of signal you want out of this graphics card, despite being a 22-year-old graphics card running on the AGP bus. When it comes to a modern feature set for displaying something and getting the image on screen, it is impeccable. So yes, we can get that out of the way. It has its main selling point still and works bloody well for it. So there we have it, Matrox's P750 Millennium graphics card, the Millennium reboot, finally tested on the AGP bus. And what are my actual thoughts? Well, it's a Matrox card, so objectively I have to love it. So apparently being a Matrox fanboy exists in 2025. They do still make graphics cards, but for some reason it's proving a pain to get hold of their new Luma range. But I will get one someday. Either way, the point remains, I think for older titles, as I said, this is an excellent graphics card, and for early 2000s titles as well, you can enjoy them with some very, very nice image quality. From a value prospect, there are so many of these floating about under different names. If you search Millennium, Parhelia LX, P750, you will find one of these on whatever bus you desire for absolutely no cost at all. These are going so far under the radar, this is your entry point to cheap AGP graphics cards that aren't a GeForce 2MX or a Radeon VE. This isn't a cockroach, this is actually something good that you might want. And it's a bit unique, it's a bit quirky. You can say you're running a Matrox graphics card in your retro PC, that's something cool. Do I think there's better options out there? Well, yes, when you start getting into those mid-2000s titles, well, you've only got DirectX 8.1 and not a huge range of power, or in this case, a huge deal of memory either. So it does begin to struggle. But then again, you could also just run a Core 2 Duo PC with a nice cool retro Radeon HD 2900 XT or something like that, and completely max out all those games. But anyway, it comes down to the fact of, I think this is a good cheap AGP card, with great 90s performance, great 2000s performance, and just around middling performance when you get to the middle of the 2000s, if that makes sense. Anyway, I hope you've all enjoyed this quick Matrox video. I've not been putting off making it, but I've not really known what else to do with it other than benchmark it, and now we've got that done. Either way, I've got a PCI version, and we'll look at that at some point, maybe when I'm ill next, or the next Matrox moment is. So thank you very much for watching, and good night.